Alexi Lalas International Soccer is a football game that was developed and published for the PlayStation in 1999. The game was also given an earlier adaptation and is also known by the Three Lions game in the European regions and was rebranded as Alexi Lalas Soccer for the North American region in 1999. That was published by Take-Two Interactive. This game did get different releases across different regions and actually rebranded and renamed multiple times depending on the country it was released in, and depending on the countries the game was released in also had different types of native footballers that were reflective of the regions that were endorsed by popular soccer players of the time. But where the game is primarily known as is Three Lions, which was considered to be the official England team game upon its time of release. The game itself got average to mixed reviews, stating that it didn't really add anything new to the variety of soccer games that were actually out there, and a lot of the reviews were based off of the complexity of the controls and the playable systems that were available, stating that the game was flawed but it was still enjoyable to some degree. While the graphics themselves aren't considered to be anything special when you compare it to later adaptations of soccer games with the likes of FIFA and ISS Pro, because those two series of games pretty much set the standard, not just in how football games played, but even with the visuals, because they were among some of the best looking soccer games ever seen on any console at the time. But those two series really set the standard, and the reality is even for the amount of football games that were coming out still after the success of those two iconic brands, a lot of the soccer games still paled in comparison when compared to what was on offer, because the likes of the FIFA series had grown in popularity, while the games themselves during its early days with the likes of FIFA 96 and FIFA 97 weren't considered to be overly great games. But it was when FIFA 98 Road to World Cup came out, that's when things started to change. It started to evolve into something else, and the same with the ISS Pro series. The problem is other games will come out, and although they were playable and enjoyable to the most part, even when you consider it to even earlier games on the PS1 with the likes of the Adidas Power Soccer series, there's a lot of them that just couldn't compare. They were playable in their own right, but the truth is by then everybody was just literally playing ISS or FIFA. There was no real need or even want or desire for other soccer games because people just didn't really play them all as such. The only other soccer franchise that did do somewhat well alongside of FIFA and ISS would have been the likes of the World League Soccer series and even the This Is Football series that would come out during the later years of the PlayStation's life cycle. Although World League Soccer would only see really life on the PlayStation and wouldn't move forward into the PlayStation 2, whereas This Is Football proceeded to have multiple sequels on the PS2 years later and was considered quite a popular franchise in its own right. So with other games that were coming out, it was just hard to find a place to fit in, because again, FIFA and ISS not only had the playable factors, the control systems, but it also had the graphics, because they were among some of the best looking soccer games ever seen visually, whereas a lot of these other games that were coming out just really could not match up to that. And I think that's what actually happened with a lot of the reviews with the likes of magazines, because everything at that point, because ISS and FIFA was so good, everything after that was compared to it, that it didn't really leave much room or much chance for other soccer games to really gain any traction as such. Now, even from my own personal perspective, like when you look at these type of games, yes, they definitely don't compare to those games, but they do offer something unique. They do play very differently. A lot of these games do tend to be a bit more finicky and tricky, and even sometimes have quite a number of flaws, as they're not as well fleshed out compared to more mainstream soccer games. But they still do have something to offer. But the likes of this game now, had this been released a lot earlier, during say the first couple of years of the PlayStation, this here would have been considered to be one of the definitive games. But anything that came out after 98 with regards to FIFA and ISS, it had to really step up its game, if you will, in order to be able to be comparable or even compete at that level. And most games that came after that just couldn't do it, which is a shame, and it's a pity as well, because some of these games did have some unique features, but just wasn't as well fleshed out. Because by the time more mainstream soccer games started to come out, people's demands had changed and people were looking for more realism, and people would notice different flaws and different things going on with games that they would pick out, and they would be more critical of these type of games, because they'd be thinking to themselves, like, why would I buy this when I know I can buy FIFA 98 or FIFA 99 or any of the ISS games that are technically a lot better and that play a lot better and that are more fleshed out and they don't have the same level of flaws. So that's what usually would have happened with a lot of these games. A lot of these soccer games would have literally just fallen into the realm of obscurity, and nobody'd even know that they've even existed in some cases. But in saying that, some of these games did sell in decent numbers, but just nowhere near the level of more mainstream soccer games. But how does it play overall in general? Well, if from my own personal perspective, if I was to compare it to the likes of those two iconic series, you can definitely tell the difference straight away. But for what it does offer, it does do it quite decently, but there are flaws. Like, even graphically it's not as good, but I don't really judge a game so much on its graphics, because again, I just love the PS1 style and I just love the quirky nature of the graphics. Even the games that don't visually look that good, for me, I just think that they are very appealing. There's a unique charm to them. But in terms of how it plays, there are better soccer games out there. Now, it is playable. You can definitely move the ball around, you can dribble around players. Compared to other soccer games, with this game you can actually utilise various aspects. You can pass the ball, you can string a few passes together, you can dribble the ball around players, but it's just as hard to do anything else because you won't score too many goals in this game. It can be a struggle to make things really work in it, but it is what it is. That's just the thing, because a lot of these soccer games as well, they were trying to compete in a crowded market, and the majority of the developers, they were either starting out, or what it was is they were usually more focused on working on other games like RPGs or racing games or different type of genres, but trying to fit in to a genre that they didn't really have much experience around. It was always going to leave them open to some sort of criticism, because they were never really going to be able to create stuff that would be even somewhat comparable to the heavy hitters of the franchise or the genre in general. But that doesn't take away from the aesthetics of the game. It is playable and you will get enjoyment out of it. It just, if you do want more of a mainstream platform, you're better to go with FIFA or ISS. But again, it's all about the memories and it's all about the nostalgic feel that these games do have to offer, and this game does have that. In fairness, it does. It really just depends on what you make of it. But like I mentioned, had this game been released much earlier, during the earlier stage of the PlayStation, this would have got a lot more recognition and would have been a lot more widely received. A lot of these games, it usually just, it's all down to timing of when it's released. They're released at times that just didn't fit well, because again, there was already better games out there. So that was always usually the downfall of many of these titles that were coming out. Developers were trying to compete, and unfortunately you feel like they were just fighting a losing battle in all respects. But it is what it is. That's just the reality of it. But it's still interesting to see all of these type of old games, and that's the one thing I love about the PlayStation, is that there is a different style of game to suit anybody pretty much out there. Whether you like the more mainstream games, or if you even do like the more quirkier style games such as this here, even though it may not be considered as good, people will still enjoy it, and I'm sure there are fans of this game out there. And again, it does have something for everybody. There is a different style of game out there for everybody, because during those early days of 3D games development, there was so many nuances and quirks around what they were trying to do, and there were so many cool ideas. And the one thing I can respect is the fact is that all these companies, even though they may not have been able to produce as good a quality games, they weren't afraid to take the risk. They weren't afraid to try new things. In some cases they worked out, in some cases they didn't, but at least they tried. And that's what I love about the likes of that generation, or the 5th generation of console, is the fact is that the ideas were there. But when you really think about it, and I do always say it, that a lot of these quirky and unusual ideas really did help to pave the way for a lot of the games that we do play today. And I do believe that it only for the fact is that these games exist. If they didn't exist, the games that we do play now would have been very different. It's just a simple fact. So a lot can be said for these games, regardless of what people think of them, whether they like them or they don't, or regardless of the reviews. They do hold a place in history to some degree, because they did help to set the foundation and pave the way for games that were to come after it. So I do believe that they should be held in somewhat high regard due to that nostalgic reason. But I'd love to know your thoughts on Alexi Lalas International Soccer, or Three Lions. What are your thoughts of these type of soccer games? Did you enjoy them, or maybe not so much? Or did you prefer the likes of the FIFA or the ISS series? Or did you prefer the likes of FIFA or ISS on the PlayStation? I'd love to hear your thoughts on these type of soccer games, so be sure to share them down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated of future videos. And in the meantime, if you want to see more content around other types of soccer games also released on the PlayStation, be sure to check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.